My name is Lisa. I'm 34 years old, and I've been married to my husband, Tom, for 8 years. We have 2 kids, Emma, who's 6, and Jake, who just turned 4. Tom works a lot. He's in construction and is a great father, a good husband too, or at least he was until I made a terrible mistake, acting purely on impulse. It all started when I received a Facebook message from Evan. You know how everyone has that one person who comes to mind when they hear the phrase, the one who got away? For me, that was Evan. We dated, or at least I thought we did, during college in Virginia. He was charming, had an unforgettable laugh, and always felt just out of reach. Looking back, he mostly used me for money, and deep down I knew it, but I let it slide because I believed I loved him. When I saw his name pop up on my phone, I froze. My first thought was, why now? I opened the message. It was brief. Hey, Lisa, it's been a while. I could really use a friend right now. I should have ignored it. I knew that. But something inside me, whether curiosity, old emotions, or sheer foolishness, made me reply. What's wrong? I typed back. Evan told me his wife had left him, taken their kids, and moved in with her sister in Atlanta. He said he was a mess, completely lost. My heart ached for him, or at least that's what I told myself. In reality, I was thrilled. After all these years, he had thought of me. I convinced myself it was innocent and asked if he wanted to talk. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was packing an overnight bag. I told Tom that Evan, an old college friend, was going through a tough time and needed someone to be there for him. Tom didn't say much at first. He just stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Finally, he asked, "Why you? Doesn't he have anyone else?" It was a fair question. But instead of answering, I got defensive. "It's not a big deal, Tom. He's just a friend." Tom shook his head. "You're really going to leave me alone with the kids all weekend just to play therapist for some guy you barely ever mention?" That stung, but I didn't let it show. "I'd do the same for any of your friends if they needed help," I said, which was a lie. I didn't even like most of Tom's friends. Tom didn't argue. He just sighed and said, "Do whatever you want, Lisa." That should have been my first warning sign. But instead, I packed my bag and drove 2 hours to Evan's place. When I arrived, he looked completely broken. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled. He hugged me like I was his last hope, and for a moment, I felt 21 again, like he was still the Evan who could make me laugh until I cried. We stayed up late talking. He told me about his wife, how she never appreciated him, how she had given up on their marriage. I should have seen through it. It was classic Evan, always playing the victim. But I believed every word. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You've always been so kind, Lisa. I don't know what I'd do without you." I'm ashamed to admit how good that felt. Tom hadn't said anything like that to me in years. When I got home Sunday night, Tom was waiting. The kids were already asleep. I could tell he was upset, but I acted as if nothing had happened. "How was your weekend?" I asked, pretending I hadn't just abandoned him with the kids. He didn't answer right away, just stared at me with that same unreadable expression from before I left. Finally, he said, "You know, Lisa, I'm not stupid." That caught me off guard. What's that supposed to mean? Do you really expect me to believe you drove all the way there just to talk? His voice was calm, but I could hear the anger beneath it. I laughed it off like it was ridiculous. "Tom, come on. You're overreacting." But he didn't back down. "Am I? You've been distant for months, Lisa. Then this guy shows up out of nowhere, and you drop everything for him. How do you think that looks?" My stomach sank, but I refused to admit anything. "You're reading too much into this. Evan needed a friend, that's all." Tom shook his head. "No, Lisa, he didn't need a friend. He needed you, and you went running like a lovesick teenager. That hit a nerve. I was just being nice. Why are you making this into something it's not?" Tom let out a bitter laugh. "You really don't get it, do you? You left your family to play savior for a guy who never even cared about you back then. What does that say about us?" That was the moment I should have apologized. But instead, I said something I regret forever. Maybe if you paid a little more attention to me, I wouldn't have to find it somewhere else. Tom just stared at me like I had just slapped him. Then he turned and walked away without another word. The silence after he left was unbearable. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, trying to convince myself I hadn't just destroyed my marriage with one careless sentence. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had crossed a line. Still, I wasn't ready to admit I was wrong. The next morning, Tom barely spoke to me. He got the kids ready for school and left without saying goodbye. I wanted to blame him for being distant, for shutting me out, but deep down, I knew he had every right to be angry. By noon, I was pacing in the kitchen, replaying our argument over and over in my head. That's when my phone buzzed. It was Evan. "Hey, just checking in. Hope you're okay." I felt a wave of emotions, guilt, excitement, and something else I couldn't quite define. I wanted to tell him everything, to unload my feelings on someone who seemed to understand me. But I stopped myself. Instead, I typed, "Thanks for checking in. Everything's fine." It wasn't fine. Of course it wasn't. By the time Tom came home that evening, I was a nervous wreck. I tried distracting myself by cleaning, but all I could think about was the way he had looked at me the night before, like he didn't recognize me anymore. Dinner was tense. The kids chatted about their day, completely unaware of the storm brewing between their parents. Tom barely spoke, nodding and murmuring responses when they asked him something. After we put them to bed, I decided to try and fix things. "Tom," I said, leaning against the bedroom doorway, "can we talk?" He looked up from his phone, his face unreadable. "What's there to talk about?" I hesitated. "About last night. I shouldn't have said what I said. It wasn't exactly an apology. Not really, but it was the best I could manage without fully admitting I was wrong." Tom sighed, setting his phone down. "You don't get it, Lisa. It's not just about what you said. It's about everything. The way you dropped everything for that guy. The way you brushed me aside like I didn't matter. Do you even realize how messed up that is?" I felt my defenses rise. "I was just trying to help a friend, Tom. Why are you making this into something bigger than it needs to be?" "Because it is a big deal," he snapped, his voice finally cracking. "You didn't even stop to think about how this would affect me, the kids, or our marriage. You just did what you wanted, like you always do." That struck a nerve. "That's not fair." I shot back. "I've done plenty for this family. I put my life on hold to raise our kids while you're constantly working. And now you're making me out to be the villain just because I wanted to be there for someone who was there for me when I needed it." Tom's jaw tightened as he stared at me. "Evan wasn't there for you, Lisa. He used you. And now he's doing it again and you're too blind to see it." His words stung, but I wasn't ready to admit he might be right. "You don't know him like I do," I said, my voice trembling. Tom let out a bitter laugh. "No, but I know you. And I know you've never been good at seeing people for who they really are." I didn't know how to respond to that. The truth was, deep down, I had already started questioning why I'd gone to Evan's place in the first place. Was it really just to help him? Or was it because I liked how he made me feel important, seeing like I mattered? The argument ended with Tom walking out of the room. He didn't slam the door. He didn't yell. He just left, and somehow that felt worse. The next few days passed in a blur. Tom was distant but polite, like he had built an invisible wall between us. I hated it, but I had no idea how to fix it. Meanwhile, Evan kept texting me, small messages asking how I was doing, thanking me for being there. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just being a good friend, but deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. Then, one evening, Tom finally broke the silence. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, pretending to watch TV, when he suddenly turned to me and said, "Lisa, do you even want to be in this marriage anymore?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course I do," I said quickly. He didn't look convinced. "Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like you're more interested in chasing some fantasy from your past than building a future with me and the kids." His words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I couldn't find the right words. "I need to know where your head's at," he continued, his voice steady but tired. "Because I can't keep doing this, wondering if I'm enough for you, if you even respect me." I froze. My instinct was to push back, to defend myself, to shift the blame onto him. But something about the way he looked at me, exhausted, worn down, made me hesitate. "Tom, it's not like that," I finally said, my voice cracking. "I respect you. I really do." He raised an eyebrow, his skepticism cutting deeper than any words. "Do you? Because running off for a weekend with a guy who used you, lying in my face about it, and acting like I'm the problem doesn't exactly scream respect." "I didn't lie." I snapped, anger bubbling up before I could stop it. "I told you where I was going." "You told me the bare minimum," he shot back, his voice rising. "And you didn't even care how it made me feel. Do you have any idea what it was like sitting here with kids, knowing you'd rather be with him?" I flinched at the venom in his tone. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" he demanded, leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you dropped everything for him while treating me like an afterthought." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. He wasn't wrong. And that realization hit me like a freight train. "Tom, I just wanted to help him," I stammered, but even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. "You wanted to help him?" he repeated, shaking his head. "What about me, Lisa? What about us? Do we even matter to you anymore?" The way he said it, like he genuinely believed I didn't care, made my chest tighten. "Of course you matter to me. You and the kids are my whole life." "Then start acting like it," he said coldly. His words stung, but instead of apologizing, I lashed out. "You know what, Tom? Maybe if you didn't spend every waking minute working or zoning out in front of the TV, I wouldn't feel so—" "So what?" he interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "Unloved? Unseen? Spare me, Lisa. I'm out there busting my ass to give you and the kids a good life while you're off chasing some pipe dream with a guy who didn't even stick around long enough to buy you dinner back in college. That was too much. How dare you throw that in my face?" I snapped. "You have no idea what I went through back then." "And whose fault is that?" he shot back. "You don't tell me anything, Lisa. You keep everything bottled up, and when it explodes, it's somehow my fault." I didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't wrong. But I couldn't admit it. Not now. Not when I felt so cornered. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I crossed my arms and stared at the floor, too stubborn to apologize, too ashamed to keep fighting. Finally, Tom stood up and walked toward the door. "I'm going out," he said without looking back. "Where are you going?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. "Anywhere but here," he said flatly. And then he was gone. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the fight in my head. I wanted to blame him for leaving, for not understanding me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I'd pushed him to this point. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. It was Evan again. "Hope you're doing okay." Without thinking, I typed back, asterisk, not really. "Tom and I had a fight. Asterisk." His reply came almost instantly. Asterisk, "I'm sorry to hear that. Want to talk about it?" Asterisk. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to confide in him, to feel that connection again. But another part, the part finally realizing how much damage I had done, knew it would only make things worse. The way I was supposed to. Tom's jaw tightened, and his hands curled into fists. "What does that even mean, Lisa? What the hell are you saying?" I hesitated, my mind racing. "When we got together, things were complicated. You were stable, reliable, and I needed that, but you weren't." "I wasn't what?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I wasn't your first choice? Is that what you're trying to say?" I swallowed hard, feeling heat creep up my cheeks. "Tom, you knew I had baggage. You knew I wasn't over Evan when we started dating. And I thought we worked through that," he shouted, standing up and pacing the room. "I thought we built something real. Was I just some consolation prize to you?" I winced at the raw pain in his voice. "It wasn't like that," I murmured weakly, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. "Then what was it like, Lisa?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I was your safe option, the guy you settled for, because the one you really wanted didn't want you. I couldn't deny it. Not entirely. The truth was, Tom had always been my third choice. Evan had been my first, the passionate, reckless love that made me feel alive. When that didn't work out, there was Ryan, who swept me off my feet, but vanished when things got too serious. And then there was Tom, kind, dependable Tom, who had offered me stability when my world was crumbling. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "That's your excuse?" he said, disbelief dripping from his tone. "You didn't mean for it to be like this? That's all you've got." I didn't ask for Evan to come back into my life. I said defensively, "But you let him in." Tom shot back. "You kept him there, in your mind, in your heart, even when you knew it would hurt me." I didn't know how to respond. He was right, but admitting it felt impossible. "I think you should go," he said suddenly, his voice eerily calm. "What?" I asked, stunned. "I can't do this anymore, Lisa," he said, his eyes red but resolute. "You don't love me. Not really. And I deserve better than being someone's second choice." "Tom, please." I pleaded, reaching for him, but he stepped back, just out of reach. "No," he said firmly. "You've made your choice, whether you realize it or not. And it's not me." My chest tightened, panic rising as reality sank in. "What about the kids?" I asked, grasping for anything to hold on to. "They deserve parents who respect each other," he said. "And right now, that's not us." As he walked out of the room, a wave of emotions crashed over me. Anger, sorrow, guilt. But the strongest was a strange, unshakable sense of relief. It was over. I picked up my phone and stared at Evan's last message. I wanted to text him to tell him everything. But for the first time, I hesitated. Was I making a mistake? Tom came back that night. I hadn't expected it. After everything, I thought he'd finally had enough. But there he was, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, his shoulders slumped under a weight I couldn't understand. "I've thought about it," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze, "and I've decided I can forgive you." I didn't know how to react. Part of me was relieved. But another part, one I couldn't admit, even to myself, felt something darker. I didn't deserve his forgiveness. Not after everything. "Tom," I started, my voice faltering. He held up a hand to stop me. "I'm not doing this for you," he said, his voice low and weary. "I'm doing it for the kids, for what we had. Maybe I'm a fool, but I don't want them to grow up in a broken home." His words stung, but not in the way I expected. I almost wanted to cry, to feel remorse. But the guilt, it was too easy to push aside. "I won't do it again, Tom," I said, the words falling from my lips. But even as I spoke them, I felt their emptiness. The truth was, I already had, but I wasn't about to admit that. Not to him, not to anyone. Tom wrapped his arms around me, holding me like he hadn't just learned the truth, like he hadn't just realized I was the one who had shattered him. I let him, because a small part of me knew I had already crossed a line that could never be erased. I let him believe I was still the same wife who loved him, who cared. But the reality was I wasn't. The affair with Evan, it hadn't been a fleeting mistake. It hadn't even really been about him. It was about me, about proving something to myself, something I wasn't ready to face. Tom was a good man, loyal, steadfast, devoted, and maybe that was a problem. He had been my third choice. I didn't love him the way I should have, but I needed him, and that was enough to keep pretending. He would never know what had truly happened. I would take it to my grave. But as I lay there in his arms, I realized something chilling. He would never be enough. Not really. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how many times he forgave me, I would always crave something more. And Tom, my sweet, unsuspecting husband, would always be the one who believed in me, always the one trying to fix things, always the one hoping it would all work out. But it wouldn't. As he drifted off beside me, his breathing soft and steady, I closed my eyes and thought of Evan, of how it felt to be with him again. And I knew, deep down, that no matter what I told Tom, no matter how much I swore to make things right, I would always be searching for something else. But I would never let Tom find out. And that, in the end, was the worst betrayal of all. It would be my secret. forever.